Hello everyone, this is Chidanand from Kratz Infotech NG. Welcome to this Ansible tutorial. What I plan to demonstrate in this tutorial is the bunch of settings and configurations that is required for an Ansible controller. Ansible controller is nothing but a Linux box that has got Ansible installed and configured on it to take control of a Windows machine, a Windows host that is running Windows 10 using a tool called Windows Remote Management Tool or WinRM, which is the preferred tool for anyone to kind of connect and take control of Windows machine. In this demo, I have one very powerful Windows machine on which I have got a Windows subsystem for Linux. You can vaguely visualize this like a partition on which I have Ubuntu 22.04 installed on it, and then would also have Ansible installed on this particular subsystem. Now for Ansible to talk to Windows RM tool, it needs a small Python library. It needs the Python library because Ansible is written in Python. And on the Windows machine, in order to allow the communication to happen, maybe a bunch of firewall rules will have to be enabled. And also the Windows Remote Management Tool or WinRM needs to be configured to listen to both the ports, not necessarily both the ports, but then I'll show you how to enable and configure the firewall so that the WinRM tool listens to port 5985, which is the HTTP port, and 5986, which is the HTTPS port. At the end of the demo, we will have configured Ansible controller to talk to this Windows host and maybe run one or two ad hoc commands and possibly wrap it up by running a small playbook. I have documented all the steps that I will be following in the video in one of my GitHub repositories, and I will leave the link of that in the description section so that anybody who wants to try it out can refer to it. Now this is the repository. I have used the apt package manager to install Ansible on the Linux partition of my Ubuntu. Now the steps are very similar even if you would want to do this on any other Linux which is running Ubuntu, which has got apt package manager. I've run all of them here. The only thing that I want you to remember is now for the Ansible to talk to WinRM, a Python library called python 3-winrm needs to be installed. Now let me just open up my Windows subsystem for Linux. All right, now let me increase the font. Okay, now this is running lsb-release-a Ubuntu 22.04. I already have Ansible installed on it. So if at all I type in Ansible version, okay, you will find Ansible version. Okay, it is running this particular version of Ansible. After Ansible, as I mentioned, we need to install this python 3-winrm. This package is already installed, but nonetheless, I'll just show you what step is required. And then all that this guy needs is a network connection, and it's already installed for me. So nothing more needs to be done. So from an Ansible perspective, only these things has to be performed on the controller. On the Windows machine, what needs to be installed and what configurations has to be done is all clearly documented in the Ansible documentation page. I have left the link to this documentation out here so that you can refer to it. Now, just I've collated all that right here as well, so that's very easy. So on the Windows machine, open a PowerShell with administrative privileges. Now these steps I've already performed, but nonetheless, let me just show you. All right, now this is the Windows PowerShell. Out here, a bunch of steps. The first one is to enable the firewall, IPv4 and IPv6. Let me just copy one of them. Now, if you have some other firewalls that is running on your machine, you will have to ensure that you enable that as well. So this is for IPv4. This is for IPv6. All right, now these are enabled. So after that, we have to set up some sort of HTTP listener, both for HTTP and HTTPS. Now, both of this I've already performed, so I will not be doing it again. But then let me check if at all the WinRM tool is up and running and if it's configured with these listeners. So if at all I type in this, all right, now you see I get an output that clearly says that there are two listeners running. One is on 85985, which is listening to this HTTP, and other one is 5986, which is listening to HTTPS protocol. Now these two are up and running. Also, not to mention, on this machine, we need to have WinRM tool installed and running as well. So Windows Remote Management System. Okay, this has to be up and running as well. Now, after all this configuration is done, let me just check if at all I'm able to connect my Windows machine with my Linux box. So let me get the IP address of my Windows machine. Now, Ethernet adapter, LAN, this is my IPv4 IP address. So this is my Windows machine IP address. So let me go to my Windows subsystem for Linux and see if I can ping it in the, this is the ICMP ping. All right. So my Windows machine is configured to allow the traffic from my Linux machine. Now the steps are pretty similar, even if at all you have two separate subsystems. All right. Now I'm all set to go ahead with configuring my host, which has got the IP address of my Windows machine and the settings that is required on top of it. One last configuration that we would need is when Ansible tries to talk to the Windows host using WinRM, we would need a user credential. So a local user has to be created on the Windows host whose credentials will be used by Ansible. So I've already created a user called Ansible-user. So we will configure this user with the password in our Ansible inventory file. From Ansible perspective, the way to configure this new host is to go ahead and create an inventory file. Either a new one can be created or append it to the default inventory file, which is under etc Ansible host. Kind of an alias followed by the IP address of one machine or multiple machines that you would want to control, variables pertaining to this particular host, user, and password. We will use the HTTPS port and the type of connection that is to be used while connecting. And certificate for now, I've just set it to ignore. All right. Now just bear in mind whatever user that you have created, using which you have started the HTTPS listeners and all that, the same user will have to be used here. All right. So if at all, I take a look at the default inventory file, etc Ansible, kind of this the same thing that I've configured here. All right, but let me just go ahead and create now. This is the user using which I have actually started my firewall and the HTTPS client for WinRM. So I'll go and use this user, but you can kind of configure any user with which the WinRM tool has been configured to use. So let me go and make that modification, and then I will run my ad hoc command to test the connectivity. So I made the change in the host file, and now let me run my first Ansible command, ad hoc command, Ansible win or win. Let me just come down a little bit. All right, Ansible win is the alias hyphen module. In the regular Linux ping, we have the ping, or in the regular Linux machines, we use the module called just ping. Here it is win underscore ping. And if you want to see what all is happening in the background, a little bit of a verbose input. Now you see, it managed to connect in an Ansible way to my Windows machine, and it is able to get the pong from there. Now I can run multiple stuff out there, but then let me just run one small playbook. Now let me see if I have this playbook. Yes. All right, I have a small playbook that I've written, again configuring to this particular host. First task using this module to create a folder called Ansible created. Now notice the delimiter. Here it is always the backspace. In the Linux boxes, you would find the forward spaces. Okay, state directory. This will create a directory, and then copy module to kind of put in a content in a file called hello.txt inside this particular folder with some specific content in it. Now this would be created on my Windows machine. So if I go to my Windows machine and check my C folder, now if you see the date modified, I don't have any folder that is called what is the name of that folder? Ansible created. Now let me run this playbook and see if Ansible created folder with some particular content in it would be the content. Hello world, a file called hello.txt. Now how do I run this playbook? Ansible -playbook win.yml. Okay, gathering facts, that's the first thing that any playbook would do. And then trying to create a folder. It looked like it created a folder. Now it's trying to create a file. All right, that also done. If you see here, if I refresh this, Ansible created. Timestamp just now, a while ago, this got created with this particular file. Now, once you have the connections up and running with the proper authentication, pretty much using this Ansible to run multiple playbooks is no different from any other playbooks that you would run. I hope you found this video informative. Thank you so much for stopping by and watching this video. In case you find my channel informative, kindly consider subscribing to it. Thank you and have a great day.